I gave him a dream cruise. He took his mistress there. I got him a dream cruise. I've been saving up for our anniversary for a long time. $15,000. The Caribbean. Everything was supposed to be magical. And then he took his mistress there. But you know what I did? I ruined his life. I remember the day I bought the tickets like it was yesterday. It was a Thursday afternoon, and the sun was warm on the back porch of our little house in Florida. Greg was sitting in his usual spot at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone, like he always did. I'd just gotten back from the grocery store and was unloading the bags when the idea struck me. 30 years together. 30 years of highs and lows, of raising kids, of building a life, and of standing by each other through everything. We deserved something special, something big. It wasn't like us to splurge, but I knew this was the kind of thing he'd never expect. A Caribbean cruise, just the two of us for 2 weeks. I'd seen the brochure at the travel agency last week, and the thought of it stayed with me. The luxury, the sunsets, the open sea. It was everything we hadn't had in years. Greg had always been so wrapped up in his work. His political life as a city councilman took up most of his time. I'd always been proud of him, of course, but sometimes I longed for the days when he'd look at me the way he did when we first met, when our world wasn't so crowded with responsibilities. I could already picture us, walking hand in hand on the deck, him leaning in to kiss me, us laughing like we hadn't in years. It was a dream, but maybe that was what we needed. A fresh start, a reset. Greg, I've got a surprise for you, I called over my shoulder as I entered the living room. He looked up from his phone, his expression not quite what I expected. He'd been acting distant lately, more than usual, if I'm being honest, but I pushed it aside. Hmm, what is it? His voice was tired, but I didn't think much of it. He was always tired. I booked us a cruise, I said, a smile tugging at my lips. A Caribbean cruise for our anniversary. It's a surprise, but I thought we could use something like this. A break. He raised an eyebrow, but there was no excitement in his eyes. Just a flicker of something. Was it doubt? He quickly masked it with a smile. Really? A cruise, huh? Sounds like a lot of money. I laughed softly. It's worth it, don't you think? We've earned it. 30 years. Yeah, well, he trailed off, his eyes drifting back to his phone. I guess so. It'll be nice, I'm sure. That was it. His response wasn't what I expected, but I shrugged it off. It wasn't like Greg to get overly excited about anything lately, especially after the long hours he spent at City Hall. He'd been more withdrawn in the past few months, more absorbed in his work, less present. But I thought this would change things. The cruise was booked. I paid for it with a credit card I kept in my name, not because Greg wouldn't approve, but because, honestly, it felt like I needed something that was just mine. For once, I was tired of living in the shadow of his success, tired of being the wife that supported and sacrificed. I didn't think much of it when I saw the first text. It was an evening not long after I'd booked the trip. Greg was on a late-night conference call for work. I had my own routine, cooking dinner, folding laundry, checking the bills. That's when I saw his phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but that night, for reasons I still can't explain, I felt this strange pull to look. Just a glance. I grabbed the phone, and there it was, a message from someone named Emily. Can't wait to see you tomorrow at the gym. I'll bring the protein bars you like. I set the phone back down slowly, my heart beating just a little faster. I wasn't stupid. Emily was young, too young to be someone Greg would usually spend time with. I didn't say anything, not yet. I wasn't sure if I was being paranoid or if something more was going on. But it stayed with me, that little seed of doubt. I kept it in the back of my mind, telling myself it was probably nothing. After all, he worked hard, right? Maybe she was just a gym buddy. But the more I thought about it, the less I believed that. The next few days were strange. Greg's phone was constantly buzzing, and he'd keep it face down, a habit he didn't usually have. I tried to shake off the feeling that something was off, but I couldn't. I started to notice other things too. The long nights at work, the odd excuses about meetings he needed to attend. Sometimes I would catch him looking at his phone in a way that didn't feel right, almost guilty. And then, one morning, I saw it. A photo. It was sitting in the gallery, hidden deep in the albums, but it was there. A picture of Greg and Emily. They were at the gym, both sweaty and smiling, holding a dumbbell in the air like they just won a championship. She was leaning into him, their arms so close they almost looked like they were touching. My stomach twisted. I wanted to confront him. I wanted to scream, to ask him who she was, what the hell he thought he was doing. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I told myself I'd let him have his little secret for now. But there was no way I was going to let him ruin our anniversary trip. No way was I going to sit back and watch while he betrayed me. I made a decision then. I wouldn't just let this slide. I wasn't going to let Emily and Greg destroy everything we'd built. The trip would go on, but not for them. It would go on for me, for my vengeance. I didn't confront him, not yet. I could feel my pulse racing every time Greg walked into the room, and it seemed like his presence alone could fill the space with tension. But I wasn't going to let him know. I'd learned long ago how to hide my emotions. The mask of indifference was second nature to me, and it was the perfect tool now. The days leading up to the cruise were a strange blur of forced normalcy. On the surface, everything was fine. Greg was excited, almost childishly so, about the trip. But there was something in his eyes that told me he wasn't as invested in the idea as I was. Still, I pushed it aside. I told myself that, if anything, he was just stressed with work. It was a lot of pressure being a city councilman. Maybe that's why he was acting distant. I even made excuses for his behavior, why he'd been spending so much time at the gym lately, why his phone seemed to buzz more than usual, why he'd been so secretive. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't naive. I had seen enough in my years as an EMT to understand when something was wrong. And this wasn't just a passing phase. The day we boarded the ship, I was ready, and so was he. We arrived at the port early in the morning, the sun barely peeking over the horizon. The air was warm but had that crisp edge to it, that feeling of adventure I used to get when I was younger, when everything was new. Greg was his usual self, laughing, joking, trying to keep the mood light as we checked in. I stood by, smiling, but my stomach was tied in knots. Ready for paradise? Greg grinned, holding up the boarding pass like it was some kind of golden ticket. Always, I replied, but it felt like I was lying to myself. I was ready, yes, but not for the vacation I had imagined. This wasn't going to be some romantic getaway. This was going to be a reckoning. He waved goodbye to me as we walked toward the boarding ramp, and I forced myself to smile. It was so easy for him to act like nothing was wrong, so easy for him to be so carefree, while I carried the weight of 1,000 questions on my shoulders. And then, as we reached the ship's entrance, it happened. I saw them, Greg and Emily. They were standing together, too close for comfort, laughing as if they were the only two people in the world. My heart sank, but I couldn't let them see me react. I couldn't let them see the wave of shock and hurt that rushed through me. I had planned this. I had decided this wasn't going to be a confrontation. But the sight of them, his arm casually draped around her shoulders, cut deeper than I had imagined. I took a deep breath and turned away quickly, walking to the opposite side of the dock. There was no way I was going to show them what I felt. I was going to turn this situation on its head. I took my time checking in, letting them get ahead. I watched as they boarded, the two of them, unaware, laughing, oblivious to the storm brewing just a few steps behind them. It was almost like they were mocking me. I stood still, letting the silence of the moment settle around me, and then I pulled out my phone. It was time to make my next move. I wasn't going to let this go, not like this. So I did what any woman would do who was ready to fight for what was hers. No matter how much she had been betrayed, I booked my ticket. I wasn't going to just let them have their vacation without me. If he thought he could sneak off with this girl, thinking I wouldn't notice, he was dead wrong. I used an assumed name, Diane Holloway. It felt strange to me at first, like I was betraying myself, but it was necessary. I couldn't risk them knowing it was me. Not yet. I boarded the ship under the guise of being just another solo traveler, blending in among the crowd of tourists and vacationers. I kept my face neutral, my movements careful, and the moment I stepped onto that ship, I knew everything was about to change. For the next few days, I observed them from the shadows. I was a silent ghost, lurking at the edges of the ship, watching their every move. They were everywhere, at the buffet, by the pool, lounging in the sun. Every moment felt like a cruel reminder of what they were doing. They'd hold hands in public, like there was nothing wrong. They'd share knowing glances, laughing at jokes I wasn't a part of. It was sickening, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for. Maybe some moment of clarity, maybe some way to prove to myself that I wasn't crazy for suspecting the worst. But it wasn't just about that anymore. It wasn't about the small details. It was about showing him that I wasn't some fool to be discarded. And the most absurd part? I started to feel something else too. Not just betrayal, but anger. Anger at the way they flaunted their relationship. Like I wasn't even in the picture. Like I was some background character in my own life. I hated it. But I wasn't just going to let it happen. One evening, as the sun began to set over the horizon, I saw them again. They were sitting on the deck, their faces close, sharing a quiet conversation. It was almost romantic. The sunset painted the sky in fiery oranges and pinks, and they were wrapped up in each other, oblivious to the world. I stood on the opposite side of the deck, pretending to admire the view, but my eyes were on them. I felt like I was watching a scene unfold that I shouldn't be seeing, yet couldn't look away from. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't just watching anymore. I was gathering evidence. I slipped my phone from my pocket and began taking pictures. Little by little, I documented everything. The way he kissed her forehead, the way she smiled at him like he was the only man alive. It made me sick to my stomach, but I kept clicking, kept capturing the moments he would never expect me to see. They didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just a vacation for me. This was war, and I was going to win. The days on the cruise bled into one another, an endless cycle of watching them, gathering pieces of their secret life and holding my breath. I had to play it carefully. I wasn't just going to confront Greg. I had to outsmart him. I had to make sure that when the truth came out, it was on my terms. I knew the game now, and I was getting better at it. Every morning, I watched them from afar. They would always meet at the breakfast buffet, their heads close together, whispering in that soft, intimate way that couples do. Greg would laugh a little too loudly at something she said, his hand brushing against her arm in a way that made me want to scream. But I held myself back. The last thing I needed was to make a scene. I stayed calm, methodical. Each night, I would slip into the bars and lounges after dinner, pretending to enjoy the entertainment. But really, I was watching them. They'd often slip away from the crowd, heading up to the deck or into the cabins for some quiet time alone. I watched it all, and each time they left the public spaces, I followed, quietly. No one suspected the middle-aged woman trailing behind them. No one thought anything of it. I was just another guest on the ship, lost in the sea of tourists. But I was far from lost. I knew exactly what I was doing. By the fourth day of the cruise, my plan was fully in motion. I had collected enough evidence to start piecing together the reality of what was going on. I had pictures of them together at dinner, his arm around her waist as they shared a laugh. I had photos of them in the hot tub, her head resting on his chest. At this point, I wasn't just an observer. I was a predator. Quiet, patient, watching every move. That night, I decided to take it once. I've got it all under control, Greg said, his voice low. She thinks we're fine. She'll never see it coming. We'll be back before she even knows what hit her. Those words made my skin crawl. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run up to them and confront him right there, expose him for the liar he was. But I didn't. Not yet. I turned and slipped away silently, heading back to my cabin. But inside, my heart was pounding. My mind was racing. I wasn't just going to let him get away with it. I had to make him pay. I had to make him feel the humiliation he was trying to hide. The next day, I took a deep breath and began working on the next phase of my plan. The photographs, everything I had taken so far, were going to be key. But I needed more. I needed more proof, something he couldn't explain away. I had to find a way to get closer to Emily. It wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. I had been watching them long enough to see their habits, their patterns. And as fate would have it, Emily and I crossed paths one afternoon when I was lounging by the pool, pretending to enjoy the sunshine. She smiled at me as she passed by, that polite smile that people give strangers. I smiled back, but I didn't make the mistake of keeping it just that. A simple smile. I made sure she noticed me. I made sure to seem friendly, approachable. Hi, I don't think we've met, I said, making my voice light and casual. I'm Diane. She looked at me with a hint of surprise, but then smiled warmly. I'm Emily. Nice to meet you. I looked her up and down. She was beautiful, young, and far too confident for my taste. She was everything I wasn't, but I wasn't going to let that show. I had to play this carefully. I saw you and my husband together the other night, I said, letting the words slip out casually. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but it was gone before I could be sure of it. Oh, Greg. Yeah, we see each other at the gym sometimes. He's a great guy. Really? He's always been such a hard worker. I'm sure you two have become good friends. Her eyes tightened slightly at the mention of Greg, but she kept her voice light. Yeah, we've been friends for a while. It's nice to have someone to work out with. I could tell she was being careful with her words. But there was something in her eyes, something like a flicker of uncertainty. I've always thought it's good for couples to have their own things, you know? I added, leaning in a little, keeping my tone warm. It helps keep the relationship strong. Her eyes shifted, almost nervously. Yeah, definitely. I smiled softly. It was working. I was in. That night, I joined her at the bar for a drink. It wasn't a coincidence. I knew exactly where she would be, and I knew exactly how to play the part. I kept the conversation light, talking about the cruise, about the ship, about anything that would make her feel comfortable. We laughed, we talked, and slowly, bit by bit, I learned more about her relationship with Greg. She mentioned how he'd been a mentor to her, how they bonded over their shared love of fitness. But what she didn't know was that I was learning something important. The cracks in their story were already starting to show. She trusted me. She didn't know who I was, but she was beginning to think of me as just another woman on the ship, just another guest. And that was exactly what I wanted. I wasn't done yet, but soon I would have everything I needed. The final days of the cruise were a blur of tension, anticipation, and quiet triumph. I had what I needed: the pictures, the testimonies, the conversations. Everything had been carefully pieced together. All I had to do now was wait for the perfect moment to strike. It was the last night on the ship, and the thought of it being over filled me with a strange mixture of satisfaction and dread. The time had come. I was no longer just a passive observer in this twisted narrative. I was the author now, and Greg was about to be the one written out of the story. I sat at the bar, nursing a drink, pretending to enjoy the live music, while my eyes never strayed far from Greg and Emily. They were sitting at a table in the corner, their faces lit by the soft glow of a candle, leaning in close, laughing quietly. It made my stomach turn to watch them, but there was something else there now, a sense of power. I had the upper hand. I watched them for a while longer, making sure everything was in place. Then, when I saw Greg stand to excuse himself, I followed. It was time to put the final phase of my plan into motion. I found Emily in the lounge area just a few minutes later, standing by the windows, gazing out at the open sea. I walked up to her, my steps slow but purposeful. She turned, her smile appearing too quick, too forced, as if she was trying to pretend she didn't know what was coming. "Diane," she greeted me, "enjoying the last night?" "Actually, I've been thinking about something," I said, keeping my tone casual, as though nothing was out of the ordinary. "It's about Greg." Her eyes flickered, and I saw her mask slip for a fraction of a second. It was enough. "Greg?" she asked, her voice slightly too high. "What about him?" I smiled, but it was a cold smile, one that didn't reach my eyes. "Well, I've been thinking about our conversation the other day, how you two have been friends for a while, but I realized something. You might not know everything about Greg." Her eyes widened slightly, her lips pressing together in a thin line. She was nervous now, I could tell, but she kept her composure. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice softer now. I took a step closer, lowering my voice to just above a whisper, making sure there was no one else around to hear. "You see, I've been married to Greg for 30 years. 30 years, Emily, and I thought we had a good life, but apparently I was wrong." She stiffened, her body tensing as if she were about to take a step back. But I continued before she could retreat. "I've been watching you two, every move, every look, and now I understand it all." My eyes burned into hers, and I saw the cracks in her armor start to show. She swallowed, her breath shallow. "What? What are you talking about?" I stepped back slightly, taking a deep breath before revealing the last piece of the puzzle. "I'm talking about your little affair with my husband, Emily. I know everything, and I'm not mad at you. Not really. I'm mad at him." Her face turned pale, the blood draining from her cheeks. The guilt in her eyes was undeniable. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She wasn't the one who had betrayed me. She was just another casualty in this war Greg had started. I, I didn't mean for this to happen," she stammered, her voice shaking. "Save it," I interrupted, my tone now firm. "I've been patient, but I'm done. You don't deserve my sympathy, and neither does he. You're both going to pay for this, just not in the way you think." I turned to walk away, but I heard her call after me. "Diane, please, don't do this." But I didn't stop. I didn't even look back. I had already made my choice. The next morning, we disembarked in the early hours, the sun just beginning to rise as the ship docked in port. I could feel a strange sense of calm settle over me. The cruise had been a test, and I had passed it. I had played my cards just right. Back in Florida, the real work began. I couldn't wait any longer. It was time to expose the truth. It took me a few days to compile everything: the photos, the conversations, the evidence. I knew exactly what I needed to do. The city council meeting was coming up in a week, and Greg would be there, as usual. But this time, he would be greeted by the truth. I contacted the local newspaper, told them everything, and sent them the photos, the screenshots of text messages, the pictures of Greg and Emily together. And then I wrote the headline. It was perfect. The next morning, I went down to the corner store to pick up a copy of the paper. I could barely contain my excitement as I flipped through the pages, scanning the local news section. There, on the front page, was Greg's smiling face, next to Emily's, and below it, the caption I had written: "I paid, she vacationed." The headline exploded across the page, accompanied by photos of them at the dinner table, at the hot tub, all of it, undeniable. There were no more lies, no more pretenses. I didn't feel bad about it. I didn't feel guilty. If anything, I felt liberated. By the time Greg saw it, the damage had already been done. The article went viral within hours. Calls poured in from the local news stations. Emails flooded his inbox. His reputation, his carefully constructed life, collapsed under the weight of the truth. And Emily? She was fired from her job at the gym by noon. She'd been the other woman, the scandalous affair, and no one would tolerate that. The last time I saw Greg, he came to my door, his face pale, his eyes wide with panic. He had tried to apologize, tried to beg for forgiveness, but I wasn't having it. I had no interest in hearing his excuses. "I loved you, Diane," he said, his voice cracking. "You have to understand, it was a mistake." I looked at him, feeling nothing but the weight of my own decision. I had watched him for months, and now it was over. "Greg," I said softly, my voice steady, "the only mistake you made was thinking you could get away with it. Goodbye." I shut the door in his face, and for the first time in years, I felt free. As I stood there, looking out the window, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The past 30 years of marriage, the lies, the betrayal, it was all behind me now. I had taken control. I had won. And as I watched the sun dip below the horizon, I knew one thing for sure. I was never going to let anyone have that kind of power over me again.